You know, there's something about Wyoming territory that strips a person down to who they really are. Not just the winters, though they'll freeze the marrow in your bones quick enough, but the way life out here don't leave much room for pretense. Back in '83, folks in Clearwater were mighty particular about what they considered proper. Man too short, he could still be a banker. Woman too loud, she might run the general store. But a woman too big, well, that was apparently more than some folks could abide. The way people looked at Angela Wagner, you'd think being near 6 feet tall with shoulders broad as a blacksmith's was some kind of moral failing rather than just the body the good Lord saw fit to give her. Most days, she carried that burden, along with everything else, the heavy loads, the whispers, the doors that closed before she could even knock. This ain't just about a woman who didn't fit the town's notion of what a lady should be. It's about how the very thing people mock can sometimes be exactly what saves them in the end, and about a man who had the sense to see value where others saw only difference. Sometimes the measure of a person ain't found in how they match what others expect, but in what they do when doing the right thing costs something. The warped floorboard gave way with a crack like a rifle shot, sending old Mrs. Hollister pitching forward. Angela moved faster than seemed possible for a woman of her size, catching the elderly woman before she hit the ground and steadying her with hands that were both powerful and gentle. "I've been telling Mr. Parker for weeks that floor needed fixing," Angela said, helping Mrs. Hollister to a chair. "You rest here while I see to it." Within minutes, Angela had retrieved the boarding house's toolbox. Her large hands, surprisingly deft, made quick work of removing the broken board. The other boarders watched with grudging respect as she measured, cut, and hammered a replacement into place, her movements precise despite her size. "Where'd you learn carpentry?" asked Mrs. Hollister. "My pa was a builder back in Ohio," Angela replied, driving the last nail home with 3 perfect strikes. "Taught me everything he knew before the fever took him, said my hands were made for it." She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of sawdust across her forehead. At 28, Angela's face was pleasant rather than pretty, with clear blue eyes that looked at the world directly. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical knot, and her dress, plain but serviceable, strained across her shoulders despite the extra panels she'd added. "If Mr. Parker would pay you proper for the work you do around here, he could afford to hire actual help, Mrs. Hollister observed, watching as Angela swept up the wood scraps. The boarding house owner appeared in the doorway, his narrow face pinched with disapproval. "Miss Wagner, I don't recall hiring you as a carpenter." "No, sir, you hired me to cook and clean," Angela replied evenly. "But I believe keeping your boarders from breaking their necks falls under my duties as well." Parker's eyes narrowed. "Just remember your place. And the community labor auction is this Saturday. I expect all my employees to participate." Angela's stomach tightened. The annual labor auction was ostensibly to raise funds for the new schoolhouse, but everyone knew it was really about matching unattached women with potential suitors under the guise of charity. For someone like her, it meant public humiliation. "I'd rather not, Mr. Parker," she said quietly. "Not negotiable," he replied. "Either volunteer or find new lodgings." Before winter. Later that afternoon, Angela stood at the mercantile counter, enduring the familiar whispers. The coins in her purse were few. Parker paid her barely enough to survive, and finding work elsewhere in Clearwater had proven impossible despite her many skills. "That'll be 53 cents, said the shopkeeper's wife, placing the parcels on the counter with obvious distaste. "And I'll need the money first." Just as Angela reached for her coin purse, the shop door opened, bringing with it a gust of autumn air and a man Angela had seen around town but never spoken to. Tall and weathered, with silver threading through his dark hair, Dennis Cole nodded politely to those present. Unlike most men who encountered Angela, his gaze didn't slide away uncomfortably or fix on her size with mockery. He simply nodded to her, as he would to any lady. "Afternoon, Mrs. Perkins," he said to the shopkeeper's wife. "Got those nails I ordered?" "Mr. Cole." "Of course, right away," the woman replied, her tone transforming from vinegar to honey. She hurried to the back, leaving Angela standing at the counter. "Cole's the name," he said to Angela, extending a calloused hand. "Dennis Cole. Run the Double C Ranch, about 5 miles west." "Angela Wagner," she replied, surprised by the simple courtesy. "Heard you're quite the fix-it person around town," he said. "Mrs. Hollister speaks highly of your skills." Angela blinked, unused to having her abilities acknowledged. "Just things my father taught me." Mrs. Perkins returned with a package, which she handed to Dennis with a smile. "Here you are, Mr. Cole. Anything else you need today?" "That'll do for now," he replied, then turned back to Angela. "You interested in some work at the ranch? My cook left at summer's end, and I could use someone who knows their way around tools as well as a kitchen." Before Angela could respond, Mrs. Perkins interrupted. "Mr. Cole, surely you don't want to hire—" She stopped, apparently remembering her place as a merchant. Dennis looked at her steadily. "Someone skilled. Actually, I do." Angela felt warmth rising in her cheeks. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Cole, but I'm contracted to the boarding house through winter." He nodded. "Offer stands if things change. Double C could use capable hands." 3 days later, Angela stood on the auction platform in the town square, cheeks burning but chin raised. She hadn't wanted to participate, but with winter approaching and nowhere else to go, she'd had little choice. Mayor Harrison cleared his throat importantly. "Next we have Miss Angela Wagner, offering a day of domestic services." His pause made clear what he thought of Angela's domestic capabilities. 20 minutes passed since Harrison had opened the bidding. Not a single voice had called out an offer. The titters and whispers from the crowd cut deeper than any knife. "Well, Miss Wagner," the mayor said with poorly concealed amusement, "seems there's not much call for a woman of your substantial nature." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Angela kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to let them see her pain. $2, came a clear voice from the back. The crowd parted, revealing Dennis Cole, hat in hand, expression unreadable. "Mr. Cole," the mayor said, surprise evident in his voice. $2 to hire Miss Wagner's services." More laughter, crueler this time, with suggestive undertones. Cole walked forward, his boots striking the wooden sidewalk with deliberate steps. "I need someone strong enough to help rebuild my north pasture fence before winter. Reckon Miss Wagner looks plenty capable." He climbed the 3 steps to the platform and extended his hand to Angela. When she hesitated, uncertain of his intentions, he spoke quietly, for her ears alone. "Ma'am, I'm offering honest work for honest pay. Nothing more, nothing less." Angela took his hand, feeling the strength in his grip as he helped her down. As the crowd's murmurs grew, Cole turned to face them. "Seems to me," he said, voice carrying across the square, "Miss Wagner's just right for the work that needs doing. Just right for my ranch." As they walked away, Angela felt the stares of the townspeople boring into her back. "Mr. Cole, you didn't have to do that." "Didn't do anything except hire the help I need," he replied matter-of-factly. "My foreman broke his arm last week, and I've got 20 acres of fencing to repair before snow flies." "I can mend fences," Angela said, straightening her shoulders. and cook for a crew. Figured as much, Dennis said with a slight nod. One thing you should know about the Double C, Miss Wagner. On my ranch, we judge a person by what they can do, not by how they look doing it. For the first time, in longer than she could remember, Angela felt the weight of others' judgment lift slightly from her shoulders. Whether this opportunity would prove blessing or curse remained to be seen. But for now, she had honest work and a chance to be valued for her abilities rather than mocked for her appearance. 2 days after Angela moved her few possessions to the Double C Ranch, Emmett Frazier and 3 of his men rode into the yard. Dennis was showing Angela the bunkhouse she'd have to herself. The previous cook had left at summer's end when they heard the horses approach. "Stay here," Dennis said, his tone suggesting this wasn't a social call. Angela watched through the window as Dennis walked out to meet the men. Even from a distance, she recognized Frazier, owner of the largest ranch in the county and chairman of the town council. He'd been at the auction, standing in the back with a smirk on his face. "Afternoon, Frazier," Dennis said, not bothering with a handshake. "What brings you out this way?" "Heard you picked up some unusual help at the auction," Frazier said, not dismounting. At 50, he still sat a horse like a younger man, his silver-streaked beard neatly trimmed above an expensive coat. "Thought I'd see for myself if the stories were true." "Don't recall inviting you to inspect my hiring practices," Dennis replied evenly. Frazier's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now, Cole, we're neighbors, and as chairman of the town council, I take an interest in unusual situations. Nothing unusual about hiring capable help. Is that what you call it?" Frazier looked past Dennis toward the bunkhouse. "Some might say you've brought scandal to a respectable community." Dennis took a step forward. "Some might do well to mind their own affairs. Your father understood the importance of maintaining proper standards," Frazier said, his voice hardening. "He'd be disappointed to see what you're turning the Double C into." Angela saw Dennis's shoulders stiffen. The mention of his father had struck a nerve. "My father taught me to judge people by their character, not by town gossip," Dennis replied. "Now, unless you've got actual business here, I've got fence posts that need setting before sundown." As Frazier turned his horse to leave, he locked eyes with Angela through the window. "You'd best remember who controls water rights to the North Pasture, Cole. Being neighborly works both ways." After the riders departed, Dennis came back to the bunkhouse, his expression troubled. "He'll make trouble," Angela said that evening as they sat at the kitchen table. Her first meal at the ranch, a hearty stew with fresh-baked bread, had been met with appreciation from Dennis and the 2 ranch hands who lived in the main bunkhouse. "Frazier's been looking for excuses since I came back and took over the ranch," Dennis replied, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "My hiring you just gives him something new to complain about." "I've faced worse than Emmett Frazier," Angela said, "but I won't be the cause of you losing water rights. That water belongs to the Double C by legal right. My father and his father signed those agreements 40 years ago." The following morning, Angela was splitting firewood when a buggy came up the lane. She recognized the mayor's wife, Judith Harrison, dressed in her Sunday best, despite it being Tuesday. "Miss Wagner," Mrs. Harrison said, remaining in her buggy, "I've come on behalf of the Ladies' Aid Society." Angela set down the axe and wiped her hands on her apron. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Harrison? We've had a discussion about your situation." The woman's pinched expression suggested the nature of that discussion. "The society is prepared to offer you passage to Denver, where there's a home for women in difficult circumstances. Mr. Frazier has generously offered to cover the expense." Angela's laugh startled the older woman. "My difficult circumstance being that I'm employed? Being that you're living alone on a ranch with 3 men, Mrs. Harrison sniffed. It's improper, regardless of your unusual stature. I have my own quarters and honest work, Angela replied. I appreciate your concern, but I'm staying. Mr. Cole could face significant difficulties if you remain, Mrs. Harrison said, her voice dropping. Mr. Fraser has considerable influence with the bank that holds the mortgage on this property. Angela felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. She hadn't realized Dennis's ranch was mortgaged. When Dennis returned from town 3 days later, his expression told Angela everything she needed to know before he spoke. "Bank's calling in a portion of the loan early," he said, hanging his hat on the peg by the door, "claiming some clause about property improvements not being maintained to standard." Angela set down the iron she was using to press linens. "It's because of me. It's because Fraser wants this land and always has," Dennis replied. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. "My father refused to sell to him for 20 years. Now he's trying the same tactics with me." "I should go," Angela said quietly. "This is your home, your legacy." Dennis looked at her directly. "Running from bullies just makes them bolder, Miss Wagner. My father taught me that, and I expect yours taught you the same." That evening, as Angela was returning from the chicken coop with eggs for morning, she noticed a rider watching from the ridge to the north. Even at a distance, she recognized Fraser's foreman, Harley Boggs. As soon as he saw her looking, he turned his horse and disappeared over the hill. 2 days later, the water in the North Pasture Creek slowed to a trickle. Dennis rode out with his men to find someone had built a dam on Fraser's property, just before the creek crossed onto Double C land. "He can't do that," Robert, the younger ranch hand, protested. "He just did," Dennis replied grimly. "And without that water, we lose 30 acres of grazing before winter." The news spread through Clearwater faster than a prairie fire. By the following Sunday, when Dennis and Angela drove the wagon into town for supplies, the change was palpable. Shopkeepers who'd always greeted Dennis warmly now gave curt nods or suddenly found work in back rooms. At the mercantile, prices seemed to have risen overnight, at least for Double C purchases. "Need these supplies on credit, Tom," Dennis said to the mercantile owner. "Just until we sell those 2-year-olds next month." Tom Wilkins looked uncomfortable. "Sorry, Dennis. New policy from the owner. No new credit accounts." "I've had credit here since my father's time," Dennis said quietly. "Times change," Wilkins replied, not meeting his eyes. Outside, Angela waited with the wagon. She'd learned it was easier for Dennis to conduct business without her presence raising eyebrows. A group of women passed by, their whispers clearly intentional. "Taking in strays like that. Size of her, like a man in skirts. What happens at that ranch after dark?" Angela kept her eyes on the horizon. She'd heard worse. When Dennis emerged from the store, his purchases were fewer than planned. "We'll make do," he said, loading the supplies. "Won't be the first lean winter at Double C." On the ride home, Dennis broke the silence. "The bank's given me 30 days to pay $500 or they'll start foreclosure. Fraser's offering to buy the mortgage for 60 cents on the dollar." "That's theft," Angela said. "That's business, according to some." Dennis's voice was tired. "Without water for the North Pasture, we'll lose a quarter of our grazing land. Without credit in town, we're paying cash for everything at marked-up prices." "All because you hired me," Angela said softly. "No," Dennis corrected her. "All because Emmett Fraser thinks he can bully me into selling land that's been in my family for 2 generations. You're just the excuse he needed." That night, after the ranch had gone quiet, Angela sat at her small table in the bunkhouse, a lamp burning low as she worked. Using scraps of leather from the barn, she was fashioning a new work belt to replace her worn one. Her fingers, despite their size, moved with precision born of years of practice. A sound outside made her pause. Setting down her work, she moved to the window, careful to stay to one side. A shadow moved near the barn, then another. Pulling her shawl around her shoulders, Angela slipped outside. The moon was 3/4 full, casting enough light to see by. She moved quietly along the side of the bunkhouse, her footsteps nearly silent despite her size. 2 men were at the barn door. Even in the dim light, she recognized Boggs, Fraser's foreman. The other man was unfamiliar. "Hurry up," Boggs whispered as his companion worked at the door latch. Angela considered her options. The main house was 100 yards away. She could run for help, but by then whatever they planned would be done. Or she could confront them, a woman alone against 2 men. The choice was made for her when the barn door creaked open and the men slipped inside. Through the window, she saw the flicker of a match being struck. Fire. Without hesitation, Angela crossed to the water barrel outside her door. She soaked her shawl thoroughly, wrapped it around her head and shoulders, and ran for the barn. Inside, Boggs and his companion had just set flame to a pile of hay near the back wall where it would quickly spread to the stored winter feed. The 2 men jumped in surprise as Angela burst through the door. Before they could react, she had swung the heavy wooden bucket from beside the door, catching Boggs in the shoulder and sending him sprawling. The other man reached for his gun, but Angela was faster than he expected. She tackled him with her full weight, driving him into the dirt floor hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. By the time Dennis and the ranch hands arrived, Angela had the fire out, and both men secured with harness leather. Robert rode immediately for the sheriff, while Dennis surveyed the damage. "Could have lost everything," he said, looking at the scorched hay and wall. "Another 5 minutes. Just happened to see them from my window," Angela replied, downplaying her role. Sheriff Taylor arrived an hour later, his expression grim as he took in the scene. Angela recognized him from town. He'd been at the auction, though he hadn't laughed with the others. "Caught them red-handed?" he asked Dennis. "Miss Wagner did," Dennis replied. "She put out the fire and subdued them both before we even knew what was happening." The sheriff's eyebrows rose as he looked at Angela, taking in her soot-stained clothes and the bruise forming on her cheek where Boggs had landed a blow. "That true, Miss Wagner?" "Yes, sir," she answered simply. The sheriff nodded slowly. "Well then, reckon I owe you an apology, ma'am." "Sir?" "Thought Cole here was making a mistake bringing you out to his ranch," he said frankly. "Didn't think it proper, but proper don't count for much when your barn's burning down." He tipped his hat to her. "You did good, Miss Wagner." Real good. As he led the prisoners to his wagon, the sheriff paused beside Dennis. "Fraser's behind this, sure as sunrise, but proving it's another matter." "I know," Dennis replied. "What you may not know," the sheriff said quietly, "is that Judge Parker arrives next week for circuit court. Man's got no love for Fraser after what happened to his brother's spread last year. Might be a good time to file those water rights complaints you've been sitting on." After the sheriff departed, Dennis turned to Angela. "Looks like we've got an ally we didn't know we had." Judge Parker's arrival in Clearwater caused a stir typical of Circuit Court Week. Hotels filled, the saloon did brisk business, and townsfolk dressed in their Sunday best to watch the proceedings. Dennis and Angela rode in together, drawing stares but fewer whispers than before. The courtroom, normally the meeting hall above the mercantile, was packed when their water rights case was called. Frazier sat confidently at one table with a slick-looking lawyer from Cheyenne. Dennis represented himself, with Angela sitting behind him. Judge Parker, a lean man in his 60s with piercing blue eyes, listened impassively as Frazier's lawyer argued that the dam was built entirely on Frazier property and therefore legal. When Dennis's turn came, he spoke plainly. "Your Honor, my father and Emmett Frazier's father signed this water-sharing agreement in 1843. He presented a yellow document. It states clearly that neither party may impede the natural flow of Cottonwood Creek where it serves both properties." The judge studied the document carefully. "Seems straightforward, Mr. Cole. Mr. Frazier, your response?" Frazier's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we contend that agreement was with the senior Mr. Cole and is not binding on subsequent owners without renewed signatures." A murmur ran through the courtroom. If true, many similar agreements in the territory could be voided. Judge Parker removed his spectacles. "That's a troubling argument, Counselor. Are you suggesting that every land agreement in Wyoming territory expires with the original signatory?" "Only those without proper legal transfer language, Your Honor." The judge leafed through the document again. "Mr. Cole, did your father leave a will?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Filed with the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne." "Then I'll need to review that will before ruling." The judge looked up, surveying the crowded room. "However, in the meantime, I'm issuing a temporary injunction. Mr. Frazier, you will remove that dam within 48 hours, restoring water flow until this matter is settled." Frazier's face darkened, but he nodded curtly. Outside the courthouse, several ranchers who'd watched the proceedings approached Dennis. "About time someone stood up to Frazier," said old Sam Watson, who ran a small spread east of town. "Man's been pushing folks around too long." "We're watching this case close," added Bill Murray, another small rancher. "You win this, Cole, you win for all of us." The next morning, Angela was surprised to find 3 wagons in the yard when she stepped outside. Sam Watson and Bill Murray had brought their ranch hands, along with tools and supplies. "Figured you could use some help rebuilding that barn wall," Sam explained when Dennis came out, "before winter sets in proper." By midday, 4 more neighbors had arrived. Men who'd barely acknowledged Dennis in town now worked alongside him, replacing charred timbers and reinforcing walls. Their wives had come too, setting up a midday meal under the cottonwoods. Angela found herself working alongside the women, uncomfortable at first until Mrs. Watson handed her a larger knife than the others were using. "Got hands like my Martha," the old woman said matter-of-factly. "She could outwork most men, too." Never apologized for it, neither. As they prepared food, Angela noticed Mrs. Murray watching her. "Wanted to say," the woman said finally, "my sister in Montana's built like you. Folks there call her the medicine woman on account of she can carry injured miners down the mountain when no one else can. Some gifts look like burdens till they're needed." By late afternoon, the barn repairs were complete, and the men had moved on to reinforcing the creek banks, where the water would flow once Frazier removed the dam. "Never seen anything like it," Dennis said quietly to Angela, as they watched the activity. "Some of these men wouldn't give me the time of day last month." "It's not about you," replied Sheriff Taylor, who'd ridden out to keep an eye on things. "It's about Frazier finally pushing too far. Man's been buying up water rights and foreclosed properties for years. Folks are tired of it." "Timing's right, too," added Sam Watson. "With Judge Parker here, there's a chance for fair dealing." "Question is," the sheriff said, "what happens when Frazier realizes he's losing control? Man like that doesn't go down without a fight." 2 days later, Sheriff Taylor rode out again, bringing news that Frazier had indeed removed the dam as ordered. The water was flowing once more to the Double C's north pasture. "Don't celebrate yet," the sheriff warned. "Judge is still reviewing the ownership documents, and Frazier was too calm about removing that dam. Man's got something else planned." That evening, Dennis found Angela on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "Should move the cattle back to the north pasture tomorrow," he said, leaning against the railing. "Make use of that grass before first snow." Angela nodded. The air already carried the crisp promise of winter. "I've been thinking about the root cellar. Needs reorganizing before we're relying on it full time." They stood in comfortable silence, the kind that had grown between them over the weeks since the auction. No longer employer and employee, not exactly friends, but something more solid, allies who had weathered storms together. "Why'd you do it?" Angela asked finally. "Bid for me at that auction when no one else would?" Dennis was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. "My mother was a big woman," he said at last, "strong as any man on the ranch. When she died, my father said he'd lost not just his wife, but his best ranch hand." He smiled at the memory. "After the war, I worked cattle drives with a fellow named Washington. Man was built like a bull, hands big as dinner plates. Best cow hand I ever saw." He turned to face her. "Judge a tool by how well it does the job, not how it looks on the wall. That's what my father taught me." "Reckon the same goes for people." Angela felt warmth spread through her chest at the simple, honest assessment. "There's coffee still hot," she said, turning toward the door. "And I need your opinion on whether those preserves are worth keeping or if we should feed them to the hogs." It was as close to acknowledging their growing bond as either was ready for. October gave way to November, bringing the first dusting of snow to the foothills. Judge Parker had delayed his ruling, requesting additional documents from the Territorial Land Office. Meanwhile, the mood in Clearwater had shifted. Frazier's influence remained strong with the town council and bank, but ordinary folks now nodded to Dennis and even Angela when they came to town. The annual Harvest Festival was Clearwater's biggest event of the year. Despite the tensions, Dennis decided they should attend. "Show folks the Double C's still standing," he explained, as they loaded the wagon with Angela's contributions, 3 pies and a crate of preserved vegetables for the communal tables. The town square had been transformed with bunting and tables laden with food. Music played from a small bandstand, and children darted between clusters of adults. Angela noticed the divisions immediately. Frazier and his allies gathered near the bank building, while the independent ranchers and farmers occupied the opposite side of the square. Dennis was immediately pulled into conversation with Sam Watson and others, leaving Angela to find a place for her pies. As she approached the dessert table, she overheard Mrs. Harrison speaking to another woman. "Absolutely inappropriate for him to bring her here after everything that's happened." Angela placed her pies on the table and turned to face the mayor's wife. "Mrs. Harrison, I believe these community gatherings are open to all residents of Clearwater." The woman flushed, but didn't back down. "Some people have a proper understanding of their place, Miss Wagner. Others need to be reminded." Before Angela could respond, Judith Murray appeared at her side. "Angela, there you are. We need your help setting up the cider press. No one else can lift it properly." As they walked away, Mrs. Murray whispered, "Don't give her the satisfaction. Harrison's in Frazier's pocket up to his eyeballs." The afternoon progressed peacefully until Mayor Harrison called everyone's attention for the annual speech. Standing on the bandstand, he extolled the town's progress and prosperity. But then his tone changed. "Of course, our community faces challenges. Some elements seek to disrupt the natural order of things, challenging established leadership and traditional values. His gaze swept meaningfully toward Dennis and his supporters. But let me assure you, Clearwater will maintain its standards. The town council has just approved an important new ordinance regarding water access and usage. A murmur ran through the crowd. Starting next month, all water rights in the county must be revalidated through the town council, with appropriate fees paid to maintain legal standing. Dennis stepped forward. That's territorial law, Harrison, not town jurisdiction. The territorial governor has granted us special authority in this matter, Harrison replied smoothly, given recent disputes. From across the square, Emmett Frazier watched with satisfaction. The new ordinance would allow him to challenge every water claim in the county through his puppets on the council. Just as the argument was heating up, a shout came from down the street. "Fire! Fire at the lumber yard!" The lumber yard sat at the edge of town, a sprawling collection of stacked timber, milling equipment, and sheds. By the time the crowd reached it, flames had already engulfed the main storage area, leaping 30 feet into the air. Sheriff Taylor was organizing a bucket brigade from the town well to the nearest buildings, trying to prevent the fire from spreading to the adjacent feed store and livery. "If that feed store goes up, we'll lose half the town," he shouted. Angela assessed the situation quickly. The narrow alley between the lumber yard and feed store was acting as a chimney, drawing the flames toward the dry hay and grain inside. Already smoke was seeping from under the feed store's eaves as embers found purchase. "We need to make a break in the buildings," she called to Dennis. "Stop the fire from crossing over." He nodded grimly. "That wall's the weakest point. If we could pull it down, create a gap." Without waiting for further discussion, Angela pushed through the crowd toward the side of the feed stores. The wall in question was wooden siding over a simple frame, not the sturdier construction of the main walls. "I need help," she shouted, grabbing a pry bar from a nearby tool cart. "We have to take this wall down now." Most of the men were focused on the bucket brigade. A few looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Are you crazy?" one called. "You'll just help the fire spread faster." "She's right," came the authoritative voice of Judge Parker, who had joined the emergency response. "Create a fire break. Standard procedure in Chicago after the big one in '71. With the judge's endorsement, several men joined Angela at the wall. Using pry bars, axes, and sheer strength, they began tearing at the structure. Angela's powerful shoulders and arms proved invaluable as she wrenched boards free and pulled down framing. The work was punishing. Smoke choked the air, and embers rained down, burning holes in clothing and singeing hair. Angela's dress was soon torn and blackened, her face streaked with soot and sweat, but she worked with a focused intensity that inspired those around her. "Almost there," she called as they pulled down the last supporting beam. The wall collapsed with a groan, creating a 15-foot gap between the buildings just as the flames reached their highest intensity. Frazier appeared at the edge of the activity, watching with narrowed eyes. "You're destroying private property, Cole." "Saving the town, more like," replied Judge Parker, who'd removed his coat and was helping move debris to widen the gap. With the fire break established, the bucket brigade concentrated on soaking the exposed side of the feed store. For 30 tense minutes, the outcome remained uncertain as flames licked at the gap, but gradually the fire's advance slowed. Angela, seeing embers catching on the feed store's roof, grabbed a ladder without hesitation. Before anyone could stop her, she had climbed to the roofline, carrying a bucket of water. From this precarious position, she doused the smoldering spots, then used her weight and strength to pull loose a section of burning shingles, sending them tumbling safely into the cleared space below. "Look at that woman go," someone in the crowd murmured with newfound respect. By sunset, the fire was contained to the lumberyard itself, which was largely destroyed. But the feed store, livery, and the rest of the town had been saved. As the immediate danger passed, the townspeople gathered in exhausted groups, taking stock of what had happened. Dennis found Angela sitting on an overturned barrel, her hands raw and bleeding from the rough wood she'd handled. "You saved the town," he said simply, offering her a canteen of water. She shook her head. "We all did." Mayor Harrison approached, looking somewhat diminished compared to his pompous speech earlier. Behind him stood several town council members and, surprisingly, Emmett Frazier himself. "Miss Wagner," the mayor began awkwardly, "the town of Clearwater owes you a debt of gratitude. Your quick thinking and—" he hesitated. "Your considerable strength prevented a catastrophe today." The following morning, Judge Parker convened an emergency session of the court. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and crowding the doorway. "Before we address the water rights case," the judge began, "I want to discuss yesterday's fire. Sheriff Taylor, your report?" The sheriff stood. "Fire started in the back of Simmons' lumber yard, Judge. Found evidence it was deliberately set." A murmur ran through the crowd. "Any suspects?" the judge asked. "Working on it, Your Honor. Found boot prints and some other evidence." "I trust you'll pursue this matter thoroughly, regardless of where it leads," Judge Parker said pointedly. "Now to the matter of Cole versus Frazier regarding water rights." The judge put on his spectacles and shuffled several documents. Having reviewed all evidence, including the original water-sharing agreement of 1843, Cole family will and property transfer documents, and territorial water law, I find in favor of the plaintiff, Dennis Cole. The water-sharing agreement is valid and binding on all subsequent owners. Dennis nodded solemnly, while several of his supporters clapped him on the back. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "regarding Mayor Harrison's announcement yesterday about new water ordinances, I'm issuing an injunction against implementation. Water rights fall under territorial jurisdiction, not town council authority." The mayor sputtered in protest, but fell silent under the judge's stern gaze. "One final matter," Judge Parker said. "In light of yesterday's events, I believe this community owes special recognition to Miss Angela Wagner." Angela, sitting quietly in the back, felt all eyes turned toward her. Miss Wagner's decisive action and extraordinary physical capability saved this town from potential destruction. It seems to me that qualities some might have considered unusual proved to be exactly what was needed in a crisis. The judge looked directly at her. "In my years on the bench, I've seen that true character reveals itself not in comfortable times, but in moments of testing. You, Miss Wagner, have demonstrated character of the highest order." The first heavy snow of the season blanketed the Double C Ranch, transforming the rugged landscape into a pristine white canvas. Angela stood on the main house porch, her breath forming clouds in the frigid morning air as she watched the flakes dance and swirl before settling on the already covered ground. The mountains in the distance had disappeared behind a veil of white, and the boundary between earth and sky seemed to vanish in the gentle storm. She wrapped her woolen shawl, a gift from Mrs. Watson, tighter around her broad shoulders, and felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for most of her adult life. 3 months ago, she'd stood humiliated on an auction block in Clearwater, deemed too large and too different to be of value. Now, she found herself not just employed, but respected, not just housed, but home. Inside the main house, the low murmur of men's voices drifted from Dennis's study. He was meeting with Sam Watson, Bill Murray, and 2 other small ranchers to discuss a cooperative arrangement for spring cattle drives and market access. The plan had been Dennis's idea, a way to break Fraser's stranglehold on shipping rates and cattle prices by pooling resources and negotiating as a group rather than as competing individual ranches. Angela had brewed coffee for the meeting and prepared a plate of her sourdough biscuits before excusing herself to give the men privacy. But Dennis had insisted she stay, saying, "This concerns the future of the Double C, and you're part of that future, Miss Wagner." The words had warmed her more than any fire could. Through the partially open study door, she could hear Dennis's steady voice. "If we combine our herds for the drive to Cheyenne, we can negotiate better rates with the railroad. 500 head speaks louder than 100. "What about Fraser?" Bill Murray asked. "Man still controls the stockyards in town." "Not for much longer," Sam Watson replied. "Judge Parker's investigation into the bank's lending practices has folks asking questions about those town council property deals last spring. Seems some of those transactions weren't entirely above board." The landscape of power in Clearwater had shifted dramatically in the weeks since the fire. Fraser's foreman, Harley Boggs, had broken under Sheriff Taylor's persistent questioning and confessed that his employer had ordered not just the barn burning at the Double C, but the lumberyard fire as well. The plan had been to destroy the feed store and several other businesses owned by ranchers who had sided with Dennis in the water rights dispute. Though Fraser himself had avoided criminal charges, his expensive Cheyenne lawyer had ensured that his standing in the community was irreparably damaged. 3 town council members closely allied with him had resigned amid rumors of financial improprieties, replaced in a special election by independent ranchers and merchants. The new council's first official act had been a formal resolution honoring Angela for her heroism during the fire. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same community that had once auctioned her like unwanted livestock now praised her extraordinary courage and strength. The same qualities that had made her an outcast were now celebrated as virtues. A movement on the ridge caught Angela's eye, riders approaching through the snow. She recognized Judith Murray's buggy leading a small procession of wagons down the lane toward the ranch house. Angela watched, puzzled, as 5 women from town made their careful way through the accumulating snow. She stepped back inside to put more coffee on the stove. By the time Knuckles rapped against the front door, she had cups and plates ready. "Miss Wagner," Judith Murray greeted her with genuine warmth when Angela opened the door. Snow dusted the woman's hat and shoulders. "Hope we're not intruding." "Not at all," Angela replied, stepping back to allow the women entry. "There's fresh coffee." The women bustled in, bringing with them the scent of snow and pine and a flurry of packages and baskets. Angela recognized Sarah Hopkins, the town's best seamstress, Martha Simmons, whose husband owned what remained of the lumber yard, Rebecca Taylor, the sheriff's wife, and Eleanor Fletcher, the silversmith's daughter. "We've brought some things for you," Mrs. Murray explained as they removed their wraps, revealing their best visiting dresses beneath. This wasn't a casual social call, but a formal visit, something Angela had never experienced before. "With winter setting in proper, we thought you might need some essentials." Sarah Hopkins stepped forward with a large package wrapped in brown paper. "3 new dresses," she said without preamble. "Made to your measurements, though I had to guess a bit. Been watching how you move, and I think I got it right. No more straining seams or binding shoulders." Angela blinked in surprise, carefully accepting the package. Thank you, Mrs. Hopkins. That's very kind." "Sensible, not kind," the seamstress corrected. "A person needs proper clothes to do proper work. Been meaning to say something since I first saw you in town, but—" She had the grace to look slightly abashed. Well, times change. Martha Simmons presented a smaller package. Work clothes, she explained. Patterns for split skirts and reinforced blouses that'll let you move without tearing. My Henry says you're half the reason we still have a business at all, the way you stopped that fire spreading. One by one, the women presented their gifts, practical items made with Angela's unique needs in mind. A pair of winter boots from the cobbler's wife, custom-sized for her larger feet, heavy work gloves from the tanner's widow, preserved fruits and specially reinforced baskets from the general store owner's daughter. And this, Mrs. Murray said, presenting the final package, is from all of us ladies in the sewing circle. Inside was a quilt of extraordinary craftsmanship, each square depicting a scene from Wyoming life: mountains, rivers, cattle, homesteads. We started it as a wedding gift for the banker's daughter, Rebecca Taylor explained with a small smile, but decided you'd earned it more. Every woman in Clearwater put at least one stitch in this. Angela ran her fingers over the intricate needlework, throat tight with emotion. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything, Mrs. Watson replied practically. Just pour that coffee you've got ready, and we'll all sit a spell. As the women settled in the main room, the men emerged from Dennis's study, looking surprised at the gathering that had materialized. Introductions were made, more coffee poured, and soon the house filled with the warm hum of conversation. Angela moved among them, serving and listening, occasionally catching Dennis's eye across the room. Each time their gazes met, his slight smile conveyed a clear message. This is as it should be. By the time the visitors departed in early afternoon, with promises to return for a proper Christmas gathering, the snow had stopped, and brilliant winter sunlight sparkled across the white landscape. Angela stood on the porch, watching the procession of wagons and riders make their way back toward town, Dennis beside her. Nice folks, he observed, once they take the time to see clearly. People see what they expect to see, Angela replied, thinking of all the years she'd been viewed as nothing but her size. A curiosity, a burden, something to mock or avoid. It's harder to see what's actually there. 3 days before Christmas, Dennis asked Angela to accompany him to town for supplies and business at the bank. Clearwater had transformed for the holidays, with evergreen boughs decorating storefronts and candles glowing in windows despite the early hour. At the Mercantile, Tom Wilkins greeted them with genuine warmth. Miss Wagner, Mr. Cole, good to see you both. The awkwardness of previous encounters had vanished completely. Got those special order items you asked for, Dennis? Angela browsed the store while Dennis conducted his business, marveling at how different the experience felt now. No whispers followed her, no sidelong glances of disgust or amusement. Instead, Mrs. Perkins asked her opinion on the durability of different fabrics, and the blacksmith's wife requested her help reaching items on a high shelf. They weren't looking past her difference. It was still there, acknowledged but no longer defining. Instead, they were seeing her whole self, capable, strong, dignified. After the Mercantile, Dennis led her to the silversmith shop, an unusual stop. Got something to pick up, he explained. Inside, Mr. Fletcher greeted them with a smile. Right on time, Mr. Cole. Got it finished yesterday. He placed a small wooden box on the counter. Dennis nodded for Angela to open it. Inside lay a silver cuff bracelet, wide and sturdy, with an intricate pattern of flowing lines that reminded her of water over stones. It's beautiful, she said softly. Fletcher here makes these for the Shoshone, Dennis explained. They give them to their strongest warriors, men and women both. The silversmith nodded. This design means one who stands firm against the storm. Mr. Cole asked for something that would honor your strength without treating it as something to hide. Angela's throat tightened as Dennis took the cuff and gently placed it around her wrist. It fit perfectly, the silver cool against her skin, but quickly warming. "Just right," Dennis said, with quiet satisfaction. Christmas dinner at the Double C became an unexpected gathering. The ranch hands were joined by the Watsons, Murrays, and several other families who'd stood with Dennis during the water rights dispute. Even Sheriff Taylor made an appearance, bringing a bottle of good whiskey and news that Judge Parker had appointed a special investigator to look into the bank's lending practices. After the meal, as folks gathered around the fire with coffee and pie, Sam Watson raised his cup toward Dennis and Angela. "To the Double C," he said, "and to finding strength in unexpected places." Later, as the last guests departed into the clear, cold night, Dennis and Angela stood on the porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The temperature had dropped sharply, turning the snow-covered landscape into a glittering expanse under the moonlight. "Been thinking," Dennis said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Come spring, we should expand the operation. The north pasture could support another 30 head now that the water's flowing right. Maybe try some of those Hereford cattle they're bringing up from Texas." "We'd need to reinforce the north fencing first," Angela replied practically, "and add another shelter before next winter." Dennis nodded, a smile touching his eyes at her use of we. "Also been thinking about that root cellar," he continued. "Could be expanded proper, with stone walls instead of just dirt. Make it last generations." The word hung in the air between them, generations, with all it implied about permanence and future. "I'd need a proper workshop, too," Angela said after a moment, "if I'm going to be fixing things around here long term." It was as close to a declaration as either was ready to make, but it was enough. Dennis reached over, his weathered hand covering hers where it rested on the porch rail. "Reckon we'll build it together then," he said. "Just right for your hands." Angela looked out over the snow-covered ranch, the land that had become her home, the place where her strength was valued rather than mocked. The silver cuff on her wrist caught the moonlight, gleaming like a promise. For the first time in her life, she felt her size was exactly as it should be. You know, there's something about watching a person find their rightful place that stirs something deep in the soul. Looking back on Angela's journey in Clearwater, Wyoming territory, back in 1883, I can't help but think about how many folks we've all known who just didn't quite fit the mold others had ready for them. The West was supposed to be a place where a person could reinvent themselves, start fresh. But truth is, human nature travels right alongside the wagon trains. We bring our prejudices and narrow thinking with us, no matter how wide open the country stretches before us. What struck me most about Angela Wagner wasn't just her uncommon size and strength, though the good Lord certainly blessed her with both. No, what set her apart was her dignity. Even standing on that auction block with not a single bid coming in, she kept her chin high and her eyes fixed on the mountains. Dignity can't be taken from a person who refuses to surrender it. And Dennis Cole, now, there was a man who understood the difference between seeing and perceiving. While others saw only an oddity, he perceived value. My daddy used to say, the worth of a tool ain't in how it looks hanging on the wall, but in how it serves when work needs doing. Dennis applied that wisdom to people, and it served him well. Fire has a way of burning away pretense. When flames threatened to take half of Clearwater, nobody much cared about the size of Angela's hands or the breadth of her shoulders, only that she was strong enough to tear down that wall and create the firebreak that saved their homes and businesses. Funny how quick folks can adjust their thinking when necessity comes calling. That silver cuff Dennis gave her became something of a legend in those parts. I heard tell that years later, other women who didn't quite fit the usual mold sought similar tokens, wearing them as badges of honor rather than marks of difference. What begins as accommodation can sometimes end as celebration. The Double C Ranch prospered under their care, becoming known both for its fine cattle and its welcome to those who needed a second chance. They raised 3 children of their own and took in 7 more who needed homes over the years, each one learning the same lesson. Your true measure isn't found in how you compare to others, but in what you build with the gifts you've been given. In the end, perhaps that's the truest lesson of the West. Not that we can escape who we are by changing where we stand, but that we can discover who we're meant to be by standing firm through life's storms, just as Angela did. And sometimes, if we're fortunate, we find others willing to stand beside us, seeing our differences not as burdens to bear, but as strengths to share.